Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Keith Levinthal. I'm the Director of Athletics here at Sidwell Friends. And we've got a special guest today, Christopher Wray, who is the Assistant AD for Compliance at Georgetown University. A couple years ago, Chris was kind enough to join us for an NCAA recruiting panel and really gave a lot of terrific insight into recruiting and just some of the NCAA eligibility rules. So we're really glad to have Chris back. And of course, at this time, it's really unique as we're going through this pandemic. And so, Chris, thank you for joining us, and really look forward to our conversation.
Thanks very much for having me, Keith.
If you don't mind, I think maybe it's helpful for our audience if you would just share what does an assistant AD for compliance do, and how you interact with coaches on a daily basis.
Yeah, so an assistant AD or a compliance professional at any NCAA school really works with the NCAA rules and interacts with the coaches on a daily basis. We do things from monitoring all eligibility, so from our incoming freshmen, basically through the time they graduate, to making sure they're on track to graduate. They're meeting NCAA progress towards degree standards. We also look at sports playing and practice seasons. So how often they're practicing, making sure they're within the NCAA guidelines, whether they're in season or out of season, and really making sure our student athletes are being taken care of on an hourly basis, or I should say, making sure the coaches are following NCAA rules based off of how many activities, hours they can participate in per the week. We also monitor amateur status for our student athletes. We make sure that they're all continuing with their amateur status through their time at college. We're updating coaches on rule changes. NCAA has a lot of has a governance structure and process that we monitor, and we fill in the NCAA. We fill in our coaches with that. We also contribute to those rule changes or ideas to try to evolve the NCAA membership through technology increases or things like that. We on that front, we also deal with benefits and things that our student athletes are permitted to receive, not permitted to receive. And I should say that's about it, but I think that's the biggest piece. I think. Oh, I should talk about the recruiting piece. Obviously, we monitor our coaches' recruitment of their prospective student athletes and everything they do in that process, when they're permitted to contact recruits, when they're not permitted to contact recruits, and the gamut of that.
And Chris, is it fair to say for you to do your job well, you really have to know each of the programs you're managing, the inside out, how they think, the vision, just so that you can help make sure that the program runs smoothly and within NCAA guidelines?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a standard that we want to meet at Georgetown for all of our programs to be on, and part of that is ensuring that they're following all the NCAA rules. That's the top from our president down to our athletic director. To me, to ensure that we're all following the rules and we're all abiding by the rules of, as a Division I NCAA member. So with that being said, the biggest thing I can do is really ingrain myself in each sport program, help them through the NCAA rules and regulations, making sure they're doing things correctly, and really monitoring what they're doing, but also giving advice and things like that.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Chris. We have a lot of students in our school, and their goal is to play NCAA sports. And certainly this pandemic is caused a lot of stress, and not sure how it's going to affect their opportunities to play at the next level. How have your coaches altered their approach to recruiting? Are they traveling? Do you have coaches flying?
We are in a dead period. The NCAA has issued a dead period. At the start of the pandemic, it was about, it started in March. It was a monthly adjustment. So they would continue they started in March, and every month and a half or so, they'd continue it. We hit September or August, and middle of August and around September 1st, the NCAA and the membership agreed that we should continue this dead period until December 31st. So we had been going on a monthly basis, and we pushed it to, all right, we're starting school right now. We have a lot of questions about recruiting. Let's slow everything down and let's continue this dead period. So a dead period in recruiting means that you cannot have face-to-face communication or face-to-face contact with an individual on campus at Georgetown or another university, or off campus, whether it's at their high school game, club practice, anytime they're out recruiting, obviously. So none of our coaches at the NCAA Division I level are permitted to be out on the road recruiting. So we are obviously not flying anywhere, and our coaches are really kind of stuck at home, if you will.
And so how have you found that your coaches are managing this? Like, how are they recruiting then? Are they relying on their contacts? Are they relying on video? Do you have any sense of what is the number one thing that you're managing right now as a compliance?
Yeah. So at the start of the pandemic, the most questions were, okay, now how can we, basically coaches were working on how can they create the same recruiting experience virtually, right?
Yeah.
You and I are sitting here on this Zoom call. I'd much rather be at Sidwell Friends in front of a group talking about recruiting.
Sure.
So how can our coaches create that experience in a virtual environment? And then as that discussion started in March, as the pandemic began, and through early spring or late spring, the coaches started coming to us and saying, like, we have these ideas. Can we come up with different? Can we brainstorm? And the membership went to the NCAA and said, we need some flexibility. So they said, basically Zoom calls are considered phone calls for the NCAA. So that's what a Zoom call, and anything like this is in NCAA legislation is considered a phone call. So there's certain times when phone calls can be made. How often it used to be how often they can be made. Only football has that type of requirement. And who can actually make the phone calls. So what we had coaches doing is they were inviting everybody on their staff into phone calls. Usually phone calls between coaches and prospective student athletes are just between the coach and the prospective student athlete, right? Well, for our basketball programs, they decided, let's bring in our director of operations. Let's bring in this person, and let's bring in another person that can kind of help facilitate that phone conversation into more of a virtual recruiting environment. So can we go have somebody go to one of the dorms? If we can get into one of the dorms, can we show them the dorms via Zoom call? Can we show them the gym via Zoom call? Can we introduce them to our AD via Zoom call? Can we introduce them to our senior women's administrator onto a Zoom call? Any way we can kind of create that on-campus, old on-campus recruiting environment in the virtual setting, that's the push. In that, a lot of times our coaches are asking me, what can we do with video on Zoom calls? Can I share my screen with a recruit? And if I have their film, can I show them their film? Can I compare their film to one of our current, one of our games, and show them how they are similar or different, or how we would like them to play or not like them to play? Things like that kind of became what can we do to kind of fill this gap, get prospects continue to be interested in Georgetown, in us, and we can show them what we can do well. It's much easier and more fun to do that in person. That was kind of the push, right?
And do you sense in terms of the identifying of prospects that they're doing, how have they made up for the fact that they can't see games? Do you have any sense of what they're doing?
Everyone has said lots and lots of video. So as much of video as they can get their hands on. They're continuing the conversations with high school coaches, with club coaches, to kind of get that sense. But it's really that video as much as they can get. I was talking to our softball coach the other day, and she was like, some of the quality of, there are some summer leagues going on, or there were some summer leagues going on. She was watching some softball through Facebook Live, things like that. It wasn't the best, but at least she could try to get a sense of what that prospect was all about, and their playing style. But yeah.
And would you mind sharing some of the adaptations the NCAA has made to accommodate prospective students in the application process, and then after that, even your own current students when it comes to eligibility?
Yeah. So I'll start with all of our prospective student athletes need to go through the NCAA Eligibility Center as a Division I, or if you want to be Division I or Division II student athlete. And with that being said, and issues with being able to take the ACT or the SAT or things like that, and basically prospective student athletes not being able to take those. The NCAA Eligibility Center is kind of changed their qualifier, their status to be a qualifier. Basically, you have to have the 16 core courses, and you have to meet the what we call the 10-7, 10 cores before your seventh semester in high school. You have to have that 2.3 GPA, and you have to have proof graduation for next year, but you don't have to take the ACT or SAT. So they essentially took off the sliding scale out of the equation for next year. Georgetown, admissions is from what I understand is, I'm not admissions and I can't speak for admissions, but they're kind of seeing how things are going. They're providing flexibility. For what they've put on their website is that they're providing flexibility for ACT or SAT scores. If you've tried to take it, if you can't take it, work with our admissions office to work through that process. But they're still going to look at, obviously, GPAs and things like that.
Sure. And so how about the current students who lost their spring season, and now, of course, we're now dealing with fall and potentially winter?
Right. So, and now the NCAA has not really altered any what we call progress towards degree standards. So the NCAA and its member institutions, at least, and I can speak for Georgetown, we're still expecting our students to stay on a path to graduate within 4 years or 4.5 years, and graduate, and potentially, if they were to extend their eligibility, potentially to do that in graduate school at Georgetown or things like that. So as you said, spring sports got cut short. They're like, a lot of them are only about a third of the way through their season. So the NCAA gave those student athletes their athletic season back. The NCAA gives every student athlete four seasons of competition within a 5-year window, and they've allowed the ability to extend that for that 5-year window to a 6th year as well. That's always available, but they made it a lot easier. And so right now we have spring sports that came back, spring sports student athletes that came back. We have individuals who graduated, who decided to just graduate and move on and be done. We had a couple who decided to graduate, go into grad school, and hope to play their spring season now, this coming spring. And then fall got canceled. So fall got canceled. Anybody who was affected by COVID canceling their fall season, it has been moved to the spring, but those individuals have their season back as well. And unofficially, the NCAA has now, from what I'm hearing, there's a Division I council meeting going on, started yesterday, ends today, in which they're discussing winter sports. And there's last I heard, it's a very real possibility that winter sports are also going to get their seasons back. So it's now up to, we now have spring, fall, and winter seasons, student athletes being able to play while getting a season back.
And do you have any sense, and this is probably an impossible question to answer, but how this might affect, current seniors as they start thinking about their next year? Do you think there will be less opportunities? I know a school like Georgetown, the vast majority of students are going to complete their degree in 4 years. But when you think about this big picture from what you're hearing, when you talk with your colleagues, do you have any sense of what it might be looking like for students who are graduating from high school this year or next year?
It's going to be a challenge, I think, for our coaches, it's always a challenge for a coach to manage a roster, right? Who's going to roll off, who's graduating, who's leaving, but who's transferring. All those things are real issues. Now we kind of, or I shouldn't say real issues, real challenges. Now we have another challenge of you have a student athlete who has a season back and could potentially return. So they first have to make sure that they have an academic nexus or an academic connection for their returning. Are they going to continue into their 5th year of undergrad and slow down their progress towards degree? Are they going to add a minor, add a major? Are they going to go start grad school potentially? So it's really a lot of our coaches might not per se want to have a senior back. So there's a lot of kind of conversations that are happening behind the scenes where now I would tell a prospective student athlete who's coming in and saying, have those real conversations with the coaches. What do you ask those coaches, what are you doing to manage the roster so that, I have the ability to, not everybody's going to be able to play right away as a freshman. We know that. But I have the ability to progress and play, play as much as I can if I earn a spot to play, if you will. And so that's kind of the log jam of playing time and things like that coaches deal with.
And have you, in your conversations with coaches or just colleagues, do you think you'll see a lot of students looking at post-grad years, delaying going to school given some of these challenges? Is that something that's come up at all?
It has not to the extent I think you would think. You have to, the financial burden on people and not wanting to go to post-grad or not wanting to push high school or, feeling ready for college, feeling ready for those things. I think there's a lot of people that don't want that option. So they're gonna figure it out. And that's where whenever I talk to prospective student athletes and people who think they want to be student athletes, they're consumers in this process, right?
Sure.
They're gonna go through the recruiting process and truly be a consumer on what's the best interest for them. So it's have an open mind, have the same conversations with all coaches to talk about what's going on, because there is a roster management puzzle that needs to be put together by our coaches. And I do think a lot of our coaches and a lot of coaches at other schools are going to just kind of push people along. You graduated, we know you have a year left of eligibility. Maybe it's not your best interest to use it here, that type of thing. It's a real conversation to have. And so as consumers who are coming into the process, are those coaches thinking about that? How are they handling their current roster for spots to open up and things like that?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And just out of curiosity, is there a question that's come up most with your coaches during the pandemic? And is it a different question that maybe you were receiving when you work with your coaches in recruiting from before the pandemic?
Again, the biggest question that's come up is how can we, within NCAA rules, create a virtual recruiting environment that's much like on campus, right? So we've been trying to get some of our video people at Georgetown to film different areas, to maybe do 3D images of facilities, sending out walking tours of campus, like virtual walking tours of campus, things that we can really try to get in front of people to make sure they're making educated decisions while they're going through the recruiting process, because we can't be on campus with them. And then things that we've talked about is how can you, is how we can use our current student athletes in the recruiting process. So the NCAA has opened that up. I talked earlier about the questions about including individuals who are not on the coaching staff having Zoom calls. Well, they've also allowed multiple prospects on Zoom calls. So coaches could have Zoom calls with multiple prospects, whether they're committed or uncommitted. They can have current student athletes involved in the recruiting process, and those Zoom calls to kind of have a panel of what you want to know about our current student athletes, having our current student athletes doing some kind of interviewing process of the recruits while they're on the Zoom calls. Because it's always that piece of how can we get the intangibles. What the intangibles, it's not just the athletic intangibles, it's what kind of teammate they are, what kind of person they are, what kind of character they're going to bring to the team. How do they interact? What kind of relationship they're going to be able to have? It's hard to create that via Zoom, right? It's hard to create that in a virtual experience. So how can we get at that as close to an on-campus or an in-person process?
Thank you. And, having, working in compliance, I know you get a lot of guidance and training from the NCAA. Is there an issue or a focus that they've had throughout this pandemic, in terms of the compliance aspect of recruiting?
It's the biggest aspect that we've had in working with the NCAA and being partners and members of the NCAA is kind of trying to keep them evolving in what's going on with the pandemic, how we can again navigate the virtual recruiting experience, how we can kind of explain to them what's going on our campuses, right? Like the NCAA's headquarters is in Indianapolis, and they're also going through furloughs as we speak. So what we're trying to do is basically, and every school across the country is in a little different situation. Whether Georgetown's 100% virtual, we're the only school in the Big East that's 100% virtual. A lot of the Big East schools have student athletes on campus, have full student populations on campus, have half of their students on campus. We're not currently practicing. We're not currently, getting ready for competitions because we don't have any, but we're not practicing. Other institutions are practicing right now. So how we can keep a level, communicating with the NCAA to try to keep some kind of level playing field with every institution that's in a vastly different situation, based off of geographic location, based off of hotspot location, if it's a pandemic if it's a COVID hotspot, things like that. We're all dealing with that, and nobody wants to use that as a recruiting advantage or disadvantage at this point. So,
excellent. Just to change subject a little bit, we get questions a lot about the national letter of intent, and are there academic qualifications a student must meet to receive one? And then the other one that we get sometimes is how binding is it? Can a student get out? Can an institution get out of it?
So the National Letter of Intent is the only true NCAA requirement is that you're registered with the NCAA Eligibility Center in order to receive one. That being said, every institution usually has some kind of criteria they go through in order to permit a coach to give a prospect a national letter of intent. Obviously, national letter of intents also must be accompanied by grant and aid agreements. So you can only sign one because the idea is that a national letter of intent the letter of intent ties the prospect to the institution. The grant and aid agreement ties the institution to the prospect. So it's kind of a two-way street that works hand in hand. And that's the most important thing. And they only really have to be registered with the NCAA Eligibility Center. Again, at Georgetown, in order to do it, we need usually a full application completed with admissions before admissions would give the go ahead to give that national letter of intent to a prospect. And every school has different criteria. And then is it binding? It is binding. It's, but are there absolute ways to get out of it? Yes, there are. I'm not going to go through every,
Sure.
Every aspect of an NLI. They're 2 pages. It's 2 pages long in a signing page that goes through kind of all the provisions of the NLI. But there is absolute ways for the prospect to get out, whether coaches change or there doesn't have to be criteria for it, but the conversation needs to be had between the prospect and the coach, because then that coach might have to go to their AD and said, all right, this prospect we signed wants to get out. Is there a valid reason that they want to get out? And then, things like, that type of thing. Also, like, the NLI, the idea of the NLI is it stops the recruitment process, right? So once it's signed and it's delivered to that institution, that prospect should not be recruiting with anybody. It should not be in any kind of communication with any other coach. So we try to think that the only times people want to get out of them are for valid reasons, such as coaching changes or things like that. Or just, you just don't want to go to the institution anymore, not because some other coach came in and swayed your decision.
And just out of curiosity, and I'm sure the NCAA doesn't have a stance, but on sort of the verbal commits, how do you treat verbal commits? How often do your coaches deal with verbal commits? And
the verbal commits are not really a real thing to the NCAA, right? Like there is no such thing as a verbal commitment, right? So verbal commitment to the NCAA is, it doesn't mean anything. There's no backing behind it. Our coaches obviously take verbal commits because they can only issue NLIs in November. So they have to wait until then. But they take verbal commits. They have idea of what they want their class to look like, a couple of years in advance or years in advance. And depending on the sport and how early the recruitment process starts, they have that idea. But verbal commits really don't mean anything to the institution. I don't ask our coaches how many verbal commits they have, because that could come and go. That number could change, from that prospect's middle of their junior year through NLI signing date in November of their senior year.
And one last question: is there anything that you think is important for prospective students to know during this pandemic, do you have advice for them? I know just working at, the secondary school level, for a lot of our students, and I just was at, our students are training in the afternoon, and I swear some of them have grown like 6 inches over the summer, and, may have been a possible D3 prospect a year ago, and now would maybe be a Division I prospect, and obviously they don't get the chance, they don't have the same opportunities as they may have had in the past to sort of show their development. Any thoughts on what you might recommend given your conversations with your coaches?
Yeah, I mean, I always recommend that that prospective student athletes really advocate for themselves. So there's part of the recruitment process is those individuals reaching out to coaches, right? Sending them emails, filling out questionnaires through the athletic department website. Camps is a hard piece. I used to say, try to go to camps, get in front of coaches. We're in an environment where we can't do that, right? Camps can't happen. We can't have, our coaches can't have camps, and they can't go to camps right now. So using your high school coaches, your club coaches to get, in the ear of those coaches is really good avenue. I don't recommend like the recruiters, right? There's these recruiting services. I don't recommend those, because it's just a waste of money to give somebody else. You use the resources that you have to advocate for yourself using, your high school coaches, your club coaches, your ability to reach out, email, really try to paint a picture of who you are. Send video if you have it. Send different things that could assist in the recruiting process to get noticed. It's a challenge now, and what I hope is that maybe the recruiting process slows down a little bit for some sports, and we don't speed it up. And it's been widely known that men's lacrosse, women's lacrosse, and women's soccer, the recruitment process starts in September, in sophomore year, and it's I think this will help hopefully slow down that process. Nobody has to commit right now. Nobody has to try to give verbal commitments right now. Recruits are, I always bring I'm going to say it again, they are the consumer in this. So you need to look at multiple types of institutions. You need to look at and really try to get the fit for you, and then have those conversations with the coaches, those hard conversations. How's roster management? What's financially look like at your institution? Is there athletic aid? Is there need-based scholarships? Is there academic scholarships? And anything that you can try to assist the coach not having to tell you, right? Sure. Coaches don't want to have to drive information out of the recruit. They want them to be transparent, and hopefully you'll be able to tell what coach is transparent back.
Well, Chris, this has been incredibly helpful, as you were 2 years ago. I really appreciate your time. I think for our community to be able to hear this will be, just really invaluable to them. So, I can't thank you enough. I hope that, sooner than later we'll get a chance to, see your teams back on the fields and the court, and but thank you, and really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely, Keith. Thanks so much for having me. Good luck with everything at Sidwell, and hopefully everybody's staying safe and healthy.